War has a way of reshaping not only borders, but the very rhythm of human existence. Between 1939 and 1945, the world became a single battleground. Land, sea, and sky consumed by conflict on a scale humanity had never known. From the shattered streets of Warsaw to the sunlit skies over Normandy, men and machines were drawn into a test of endurance. A contest not only of armies, but of ideas and wills. And among those machines, none embodied the brutal poetry of the Second World War more completely than one unlikely creation. A fighter so powerful and resilient that its roar became the anthem of Allied air power, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. To some, it was an iron beast, too heavy, too unwieldy. To others, it was a guardian angel in metal form, a flying fortress disguised as a single-seat fighter. But to the men who flew her, she was something more than a machine. She was survival. By 1940, the tide of war in Europe was turning black. The German Luftwaffe dominated the skies, raining destruction on cities from London to Rotterdam. The Allies were desperate for a counterpunch, a fighter that could endure long-range missions, strike deep into enemy territory, and live to tell the tale. At Republic Aviation, a team of American engineers led by Alexander Kartveli set out to do the impossible. The aircraft they envisioned defied convention. While most fighters were built for speed and elegance, Kartveli's design emphasized power and protection. The result was a machine that looked more like a sledgehammer than a rapier, massive, barrel-shaped, and bristling with 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns. Its engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, was one of the most powerful piston engines ever built. When it came to life, the ground trembled. Yet when pilots first saw the Thunderbolt, skepticism filled the air. It looked too heavy to fight, too slow to survive. But as tests began, disbelief turned to awe. The P-47 climbed higher, dove faster, and absorbed more punishment than any aircraft of its generation. It wasn't graceful, but it was indestructible. The Thunderbolt's combat debut came in early 1943 as Allied air forces began their relentless campaign against Germany. From the airfields of southern England, young American pilots climbed into their new machines, uncertain of what awaited them across the Channel. At first, the missions were simple: bomber escort, reconnaissance, and limited strikes. But the skies over Europe were ruled by seasoned Luftwaffe aces. Each mission became a duel between courage and chaos. The P-47s soon proved their worth in the most brutal way imaginable. In a dive, they were unstoppable, their immense weight turning gravity itself into a weapon. A single Thunderbolt could fall from 30,000 feet like a meteor, unleash a torrent of fire, and climb out of the wreckage faster than any pursuer could follow. Enemy pilots learned to fear the sudden streak of silver diving out of the sun, the roar of its radial engine followed by the thunder of machine guns. The Allies had found their hammer. Behind every flight number was a name, a face, and a story. Most of these pilots were barely in their 20s, men who had grown up in small American towns and found themselves fighting over the skies of Europe. They flew missions that stretched for hours, oxygen masks icing over, fuel running low, surrounded by flak and fire. Many never came back, yet those who did carried with them an unshakable bond, a brotherhood forged in the thin air above occupied France. Pilots spoke of how the Thunderbolt could take damage no human should survive. One recalled returning home with holes the size of footballs in his wings. Another landed with half his tail gone, yet the aircraft still held together. To the men who flew her, the Thunderbolt was more than just an airplane. She was alive, a creature of steel and fire that refused to die. By 1944, the P-47 had evolved into one of the most versatile weapons in the Allied arsenal. While other fighters like the P-51 Mustang would later take the spotlight for long-range escort, the Thunderbolt carved its legacy on the ground. It became a tank buster, a convoy destroyer, a scourge of the German war machine. Flying low and fast, its pilots strafed trains, columns and bunkers, cutting through enemy lines with relentless precision. Each mission blurred the line between heroism and survival. The sky was a graveyard of twisted metal, but the P-47 kept returning, battle after battle, scarred yet unbroken. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, it became the constant shadow of Allied troops pushing eastward. When soldiers on the ground heard the deep growl of its engine, they knew help was coming. By mid-1944, the war had entered its decisive phase. The Allies were preparing for the most daring amphibious assault in military history, the invasion of Normandy. Success on the beaches would depend on control of the skies above, and in that crucial moment, the P-47 Thunderbolt became the workhorse of liberation. In the weeks before D-Day, Thunderbolts flew endless sorties over northern France. They hunted supply trains, shredded rail lines, and struck convoys with relentless precision. German fuel depots and ammunition dumps vanished under waves of bombs and rockets. Every mission weakened the enemy's ability to resist the coming storm. When June 6th arrived, the skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies. While paratroopers dropped into the darkness and soldiers waded ashore through surf and fire, the Thunderbolts roared above them, strafing enemy gun nests, silencing artillery, and shielding the fragile beachhead. From dawn to dusk, they circled over the chaos like guardian spirits of steel. For the men below, the sound of a P-47 overhead meant hope. For the Germans, it meant terror from above. As the war pressed deeper into Europe, the Thunderbolt adapted yet again. It shed its escort duties and became the master of ground attack. Pilots called it simply the Jug, a name born from affection and awe. With its armor-plated fuselage and unmatched firepower, the Jug could do what few aircraft dared. It swooped low over enemy territory, unleashing rockets and bombs that could shatter a column of tanks or tear apart a bridge in a single pass. Each sortie pushed the limits of both man and machine. German flak batteries filled the air with black clouds of shrapnel, yet the P-47s kept diving in, again and again. When one plane fell, another took its place, a relentless tide of thunder and smoke. Pilots soon earned reputations that became legend. Names like Robert Johnson, Gabby Gabreski, and Francis Gabby Boyington became synonymous with daring. They pushed their Thunderbolts to the edge, often returning home with their wings shredded and engines bleeding oil, but alive. The P-47's resilience turned it into a symbol of Allied determination. It was the iron will of a generation, given wings. In December 1944, the war took a cruel turn. Hitler launched a desperate counterattack through the Ardennes, what history would call the Battle of the Bulge. The skies were locked in freezing fog, grounding Allied aircraft for days, while German tanks surged forward. When the weather finally cleared, the Thunderbolts returned with vengeance. They cut through the mist and snow, ripping apart convoys and fuel trucks, halting the offensive one sortie at a time. The roar of their engines echoed through the frozen forests, a reminder that the skies once again belonged to the Allies. By the time spring came, Germany was collapsing. Thunderbolts patrolled roads, bridges, and train yards, leaving behind nothing that could move under the Reich's fading flag. When peace finally arrived in May 1945, the P-47 had flown more than 500,000 combat sorties and destroyed tens of thousands of enemy vehicles. It had outlasted the war it was built for. When victory came, the men returned home. For many, the silence of peace was almost unbearable. They had lived so long with the constant thunder of engines, the rush of air, and the crack of gunfire, that the quiet felt foreign, unsettling. The Thunderbolt, too, was left behind. Many were scrapped or sold, their metal melted down for peacetime machines. But a few survived, preserved in museums, or kept alive by veterans who couldn't bear to see their old companion fade into memory. In time, newer jets would take the skies, faster, sleeker, more advanced, but none would carry quite the same weight of history. For those who had seen the world from behind the glass canopy of a P-47, that view would never leave them. They had looked down upon war itself and survived. Today, when historians speak of the Second World War, the Thunderbolt often stands in the shadow of the more famous Mustang or the legendary Spitfire. Yet, in sheer durability and destructive power, few aircraft matched its legacy. It was the workhorse of the air war, a weapon of endurance and willpower. It represented an industrial nation's ability to turn raw steel and determination into something unstoppable. To the men who flew it, the Jug wasn't just a fighter. It was a fortress, a savior, and a trusted friend. They believed, with quiet certainty, that if you treated the Thunderbolt right, it would bring you home, no matter how impossible the odds. And in that belief lies the heart of its legend. Decades have passed since the world last trembled under the sound of a P-47 engine. The pilots who once soared through clouds of fire are now old men, their hands no longer steady, their voices softened by time. But when they speak of those days, of the sky burning above Europe, of the fear and the brotherhood, their eyes still light with something unspoken. They remember the cold mornings on English airfields, the smell of oil and cordite, and the thunder that followed them into battle. They remember the feeling of climbing through the clouds, not knowing if they would return. And they remember the machine that carried them through it all, the last great beast of the piston age. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more than an aircraft. It was the sound of freedom being fought for, the echo of courage forged in steel. And though the world has changed, that echo still lingers, whispering through hangars, across museums, and in the stories of those who once flew into the heart of war and came back riding the thunder.